Hello, interwebs, and welcome to Closeup. I'm your host, Joe.
And I'm Justin.
And we've got another leisure list for you. Let's zoom in from our extreme long shot to our medium shot now, haven't said that in a while, and explain the new rules for you. So, because these leisure lists inevitably always seem to balloon into hour-and-a-half long movies, we will cut the length of the number of items on the list to a set number so that they can never balloon that badly. So I will be capped at 8 and Justin will have 4. Some of them he will have seen, others maybe not. We're going to be trying to keep the newest releases up top, as we have been for the last couple, and try to give ourselves no more than 5 minutes to talk about each thing. And then at the end, I'll just do a run through of my favorite picks for the best movies I've seen in the last couple months, because the list would be pretty boring if we were to just talk about the very best things we've seen. So we're pivoting this more from review style to explain style, like the videos Ryan and I used to do, where we would try to get the other convinced to watch something. So there'll be more questions, more give and take than lecturing. And let's run down our list that we are going to cover today, probably with medium degree spoilers for each of these things. We'll try not to get into the big plot twists or anything, but let's just assume each other hasn't seen it and try to make a good pitch. So the list today will be Invincible Season 3, Cobra Kai Season 6 Part 3, Dungeon Crawler Carl Book 7, Mickey 17, The Witcher Sirens of the Deep, Escape from New York, The Mist, Harrow the Ninth, Solo Leveling. I think that's it. I went a bit out of order there, but that's what you're getting today. So, without further ado, let's get into our close-up and talk about Invincible Season 3, which you have started but are not done, correct?
Yeah, I'm like 2 episodes in.
2 episodes in. So what's happening in those first 2 episodes so far for you?
Omni-Man is sitting in jail.
He'll do that for a while, yeah.
And what's his name? His little alien brother just discovered his powers.
Oliver.
Yeah, Oliver, that's right.
Okay. So, yeah, if you're waiting for Omni-Man to get out, you have a long wait to go. He basically languishes in prison for way longer than you'd expect, and then basically just drops out of the season entirely. So don't expect any payoff for Omni-Man and Alan the Alien this year, but you do see a little bit more of where they're going.
I mean, I will say, I didn't expect him to even come back in Season 2, so...
Fair enough. So, having seen the whole season, I gather that its overarching theme is about the moral grays of heroism. It's about the classic Spider-Man responsibility sort of shtick, where Mark, after many, many experiences, starts wondering how responsible he is for the bad things that happen, or what responsibilities he owes to people at the expense of his personal life. And the Guardians of the Globe are going through a very similar thing too. Everyone this season is basically just questioning, okay, but where's the line between my personal life and my job as a hero defending the planet? There's also a lot of other moral grays everyone's questioning this season, like when is it okay to start killing bad guys? There are certain situations where stopping a very powerful threat before it can become a worse one is justified, which, spoilers for season 2 of Invincible, but Mark is still dealing with his murder of Angstrom Levy at the end of season 2, and he's questioning, did I do the right thing in this case? But season 3 is also interesting because it's not just about the bad guys, it's also about schisms between the good guys as well. Because have you gotten to the part where what Cecil did to Mark?
Maybe
With the
he did something with the room.
he did something with the okay. So you're at the cliffhanger where they were about to have their confrontation.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Okay. And you knew what the confrontation was about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another big thing about season 3 is Cecil doing things like this to push the boundaries. Is it also, in the name of stopping worse bad guys, is it okay to work with people who've done atrocious things? That's another big thing. So it's not just, okay, is killing the villains even worse? We can't trust our allies now because they're working with the bad guys, but for a greater good. Is that okay? Is Cecil somebody we can trust now because he's working with bad guys? But we know Cecil's a good guy, so it's a very morally gray situation that Mark has to learn to navigate. And he's got the power to kill everybody if he wants, but he's just kind of figuring out who are my actual allies and who are my enemies and how far should I go with my enemies and how much should I be holding back?
I always have a hard time with his relationship with Cecil just because like they really clash, but you get to see Cecil's side kind of like Cecil doesn't have powers where Mark still has that kind of obliviousness. He doesn't really consider that. He's pretty self-centered a lot of times, I feel.
You saw the thing he did with Eve, right? Yeah, that's first few episodes, so we can get into that. Where future Eve, at the end of season 2, tells Mark, I was just pining after you for 20 years. You got to tell her you love her or let her move on. And despite the advice of William, Mark, being an idiot, tells Eve, I love you, but I'm only saying that because your future self, I mean it. I mean that. But like, I'm only telling you now because I was kind of prompted to. And, that goes about as well for him as you'd expect. But look, I've been in those situations in relationships too, where you feel like you're doing the right thing by clearing your conscience, but it's really just for you and it's going to make a bigger problem down the line. So, if the net result is you love her and you're doing okay, sometimes just keep your mouth shut about the details about things. It just causes more problems than it's worth. It was unnecessary. But Eve is a very easygoing person and let him off the hook for that one. And season 3 largely revolves around their relationship together and them taking the next step in their will they, won't they, and
finally.
Yeah, and seeing what's the power couple like, really. That's what a lot of season 3 is about for their personal stories. So let's see, what else? Do you have any questions for anything you think might be further explored or?
Not really. I don't know.
I will say the last couple episodes of this season are among the all-time best in the series. It's kind of like a 1, 2, 3 punch with the last 3 episodes of this season. They're just the Powerplex one, this like global war thing that happens that Mark has to deal with. The final confrontation, which is somehow even more brutal than the one with Omni-Man at the end of season 1.
Holy cow.
That one makes it look like, Omni-Man was holding back. Oops. Yeah. So that one very much pays off. It's probably the best fight in the series. This character really hadn't gotten much screen time, but in one episode solidifies themselves as one of the best villains in the entire show. With, like, basically nobody else gets a lot of dialogue in that very last episode. It's mostly just this last guy, this one guy, the villain of it. And he's just a powerhouse, just comes in swinging, and it leads to some pretty shocking moments. Like, I always think this show and a lot of other modern media have desensitized me to violence. And then I watched Invincible season 3, episode 8, and then it's like, oh, nope, there are still things that make me cringe and, ooh, okay, they're going further than I expected. Amazing. But it all feels in service of the story. The action's still amazing and bloody and kinetic. I really like the animation. And I also appreciate Invincible season 3 for how episodic it still feels. A lot of shows nowadays have this compulsion to make every single episode drag out its lore and mythology, but Invincible always manages to feel like a self-contained episodic story that still moves stuff forward. So every episode, you're basically getting a villain of the week and something Mark or one of his friends is dealing with, and the story overall still continues to move forward at a reasonable pace. Big things happen this season. There are big consequences going into season 4, and it's setting the ground for a pretty spectacular continuing series. Season 3 is must-see TV, I'd say for sure. So, another big TV show, which you've had no part in, unfortunately, up to this point. Cobra Kai Season 6, Part 3, which, gotta say, I'm annoyed still with how Netflix handles this season of Cobra Kai in particular, with how they took a 15-episode season, which is a pretty lengthy one by Netflix standards, but they chopped it up into 3 parts. So they did 5 episodes, and then they waited a couple months and did another 5, and then they waited a couple more months and did the last 5, which, for my money, completely killed the momentum of the season, especially because part 2 was weaker, the weakest of the 3 chunks. And part 3 was basically just the road to the ending. Like, okay, part 2 is where we had a lot of the big fights. We had probably one of the I'll say it's the biggest consequence of the Karate Wars of the series up to that point was the ending of season 6, part 2. And then part 3 follows up on the aftermath of that and finalizes all the confrontations and starts the road to the ending. And it was a flawed but powerful ending for this glorious karate soap opera. Very few shows make me this invested before their ending and manage to keep me caring about its characters all the way through a show. Season 6, part 3 does feature some extra over-the-top moments, even by Cobra Kai standards, but, you know, it was the ending. Go out with a bang, I guess. There are certain character resolutions that arguably have been building since 1984 that they finally pay off here. It took 6 seasons of a TV show in the Karate Kid trilogy and decades of fan interaction with these characters, and, you know, they everything pays off in the end for Johnny and Daniel and Kreese, these people we've been following for 40 years in some form or another. The other characters, however, I feel like a lot of them were sidelined in this part. I mean, we got the big resolutions for Robbie, Miguel, Tori, and Sam, but everybody else, Devin, Kenny, Anthony, all the other side kids, they didn't really get the payoffs I was hoping for. But they didn't get bad endings either. They were just sort of sidelined. The final, all the fights were pretty good for the most part, although I do feel like these fights weren't as good as the ones in the last part, because the last part was like the World Karate Championship one. So they're like, hey, we gotta give our A game here out of all our 6 seasons. And this feels like, okay, we've done 6 seasons with a whole lot of combat choreography and we're running out of ways to keep this interesting. But it's still very entertaining and well performed and well choreographed as well.
So this is the final season.
Yeah.
So would you say overall that it was worth like expanding into this territory with Karate Kid? Like
100%. Yeah, because what Cobra Kai did for the series was The Karate Kid is a great standalone movie, and its sequels declined in quality as it went, although they do still have their fans. I'm a big fan of Karate Kid Part 2 in particular. I even like number 3 in the next Karate Kid more than most people, despite them being very flawed. But what Cobra Kai did was it flipped the story on its head. Especially later Cobra Kai, it brought back basically every supporting character from 2, 3, and 4, not from 4, but from 1, 2, and 3. Like everyone from like Johnny's bully friends at Cobra Kai to the people Daniel met in Japan in Part 2, even like the super corny villain from Part 3 and like all his friends from Part 3 as well. Like everybody who is still alive made an appearance on this show. And it fleshed them out in ways that the worst movies in the original trilogy never did. So someone like Terry Silver was kind of a joke in Karate Kid Part 3. Like, oh, he's just this cocaine snorting millionaire, corporate, greedy jerk guy. And he still is like that, but he's got so much more depth in this show with a lot of time, screen time to give him that. And it basically deepened all the villains of the original trilogy. And some of them ended up going on to to Daniel's side, and other ones continued to be opposing forces for him the entire series. But Johnny Lawrence is really the main character of Cobra Kai. And the entire show is basically his redemption arc, because at the start of the series, we find out that basically between the 1-2 punch of Daniel kicking him in the face and he loses his karate championship, and then at the start of Karate Kid Part 2, his sensei turns on him, calls him a loser and a failure, and physically assaults him in front of all their students. And after that point, Johnny Lawrence basically became the guy who peaked in high school, and life just didn't go very well for him. So then at the start of Cobra Kai, he brings back Cobra Kai. And Daniel's been out of karate for many, many years now, but he's like, oh, so Johnny Lawrence, my old high school bully, is bringing back that karate style for dirtbags that, John Kreese was basically making an army of child soldiers, and those were like some of the biggest pricks in the valley, and Johnny Lawrence is bringing that back? I don't think so. And it kind of became that rivalry igniting. But Johnny's just trying to get some redemption. Like, karate was the only thing in my life that I was ever good at, and I want to bring it back, but do it better than my master did it. And then the show just escalates from there, with Daniel getting his style of karate back, but Mr. Miyagi's gone now, so he doesn't have an emotional anchor or someone to go to for advice, except for his wife, really, who's the wisest character on the show. She's very the point of view of the audience when things are getting too insane. If you, the audience member, thinks it, Daniel's wife is the one who says it in the show. But yeah, so it's like the new generation. Oh yeah, and the great thing about the beginning too was Johnny didn't just form this dojo for himself. He started the dojo to help out his nerdy this nerdy teenage neighbor of his who was getting bullied, and he kind of takes a liking to this kid and teaches him to, don't be such a nerd. I'm going to teach you to be badass, okay? And it's exactly what you think it is. It's like this 80s movie bully who's a little bit more nuanced than you give him credit for, who has a very 1980s way of thinking. He's a very not politically correct guy and has a lot of values that conflict with the new generation, but the new generation finds a lot of potential for self-growth in his no-nonsense approach to life. He kind of toughens them up and turns them into warriors, but a better breed of warrior than he was trained to be. And then Daniel's the opposing force, and then John Kreese comes back and starts turning it military-like again, and there's a lot of back and forth, and until the whole town's basically, and like all the teenagers in town are basically picking a side. Are you Miyagi-Do? Or are you Cobra Kai? Or are you Eagle Fang later on? And it just builds up, like all these international villains start coming in. Like you start going back to, eventually you like season 6 introduces the original Cobra Kai dojo from South Korea, where John Kreese first learned the moves back in Vietnam era. Is it like basically it makes the Karate Kid this decades spanning story, which basically starts, you can go all the way back from like Karate Kid Part 2 is like Mr. Miyagi's backstory in Okinawa, and like in World War II, like he's got a history there. We see in Cobra Kai, we see flashbacks of John Kreese and Terry Silver in Vietnam. We know what happened in the 80s because those were the original movies. And then we see what all those characters are doing in modern times as well. So it really makes the Karate Kid saga like this 80-year spanning story, which we've only seen in real time for 40 years of it. And I think Karate Kid, the Cobra Kai series is also amazing for how it handles the new characters, because I feel like that's where a lot of continuations drop the ball. I'm still mainly a fan of Daniel and Johnny and their ongoing rivalry, but the more the show goes on, the more you really come to love all the new characters, all the new teenagers who are in the show, their kids mostly, and their relationship, their mentor-mentee relationships. It's really a show about legacy and passing on the lessons your masters taught you, even though with a bit of wisdom you can see the flaws in your own masters as well, and you're trying to pass on your wisdom but better, but it doesn't always work the way you intended it. So it's about legacy and passing on what you've learned and trying to be better than what came before you, and finding a bit of redemption, and it's something you're really good at in your passions, and overcoming the obstacles in your way. And yeah, it basically the series spans from 80s movie bully Johnny Lawrence having to train his nerdy next door neighbor to a lot of these kids ending up in the World Karate Championships by season 6, where all these styles finally come together and everyone finds the best balance of everything. So I've been on Cobra Kai a bit longer than I thought, but I figured Justin needed the pitch for Cobra Kai.
It does seem interesting.
Some people prefer the more grounded tone of the first couple seasons. It's not like when Netflix took it over, they basically ballooned it into a full-on karate soap opera. It gets way more bombastic and nuts. The fights get bigger, considerably less realistic. Everyone always says like, oh, where were the cops during this entire show? Did the police just not exist? No, this is a show where everyone handles their own problems with their fists and feet. It's karate.
It follows the original movies too. Like, yeah. It's the style.
The cops don't exist in this world, basically. Just forget it.
They don't interfere with your problems. No,
the karate wars are being handled in the valley by the dojos that are fighting them, and that's it. So yeah, it's this big spanning series, which it's a love letter to the originals. It honors them. It expands on them. It even retroactively makes some of the originals better. Deepens the characters who were two-dimensional before. Love Cobra Kai. Had a really good ending. But season 6, part 3, I'd say pretty darn good on the whole. Flawed, but stuck the landing. So, Dungeon Crawler Carl, tell me about that.
Yes, so book 7 just recently came out. I don't know if you heard anything about this before or
Only from you.
okay. So I talked about on the last episode, I think it was, I talked about the literature RPG style. It's kind of blowing up. This is like the king daddy of literature RPG.
Okay.
Undeniably. It starts out like it's not by no means grounded, but at the same time kind of is. Basically, it starts out with the apocalypse, and you've got this guy and his ex-girlfriend's cat, and they walk into the dungeon that's been made out of the flattened remains of the earth. The first line of the book, the first book, is fantastic. It's basically like, oh, the time is 6:30 and everything's been leveled. And it's just like it catches you from the first line. I'm doing a bad job of explaining that part, but it's really good right off the hop. But it's consistently this dungeon world that they have to go through. It's like a game, and people are watching it. All the aliens are watching it. They're kind of using it as resource farming at the same time. Each book after the first one has done like one level. So it's been really impressive that the writer of the book, Matt Dinneman, has been able to come up with concepts for each of these levels that makes them feel super distinct. Mm-hmm. And it's just been so impressive how he's managed to keep that up. Like there's the one that everybody likes the most is this train level. And it totally flips things around where you go from the first one, which is a typical like dungeon crawl. They're walking through the passageways. Do we go left? Do we go right? It's kind of like a maze.
Yeah.
And it's really big and all this stuff. And that's totally flipped on your head when most of the world is made up of trains and stuff. But it's so unique how it's done. But coming into book 7, so book 7 has been built up since the very first book.
All right.
In the very first book, the cat puts on this crown that basically gives her more power, but means that she's part of this blood sultanate. So they warn you from the first book. They're like, oh, when you get to the 9th floor is faction wars. Right off the hop, the first book tells you about this, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, now that you're part of the Blood Sultanate, you have to kill everybody. There's only one that's allowed to get through. You have to kill everybody from the Blood Sultanate. And so we've been building to this, and book 7 is finally faction wars. And it's been building up. More dramas come about it. Lots of changes have gone down, and it's everything I would have hoped for. It's fantastic. It's great because a lot of people criticized the last one. They said the 6th one was a little bit boring. They kind of didn't like the premise of the level, and arguably it's not as good. There's less interaction between all of the characters. They're all kind of segregated from each other, so it didn't work as well as some of the other levels.
So would you say these books sort of live and die based on the premise?
Definitely.
Individually?
Every level, like if a level doesn't work, the book is just, it's not. I mean, the characters are still really well written, and you want to follow their stories. But it is, if the level doesn't work, the book's just not going to be as good. But so far, pretty much all of them have been hits except for the last one, which is still good.
So is 7 a step up then?
7 was definitely a back to form. Everyone seems to up the ante, and it goes bigger and bigger, and the characters become progressively more insane in a way.
Because they get the people in charge of them, you told me before, give them power-ups and whatnot. It's basically like the TTRPG sort of thing, right? It's kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, but in a book form.
Yes,
but in a very, in this case, a very specific setting, where they have to get from level to level. Yeah. So I'm shocked they managed to keep it interesting for 7 books, and this isn't even the end, is it?
No, we're not sure where the end is going to be, because the pitch initially was that this game only has 18 levels, but the 18th level is where all the rich people come to just like party, like from the outside. They come and party on the 18th floor. Even the 9th floor Faction Wars is supposed to be, they play a game, but it is risky what they're doing on that level. But the super, super rich guys at the top of the universe, they come and hang out on the 18th floor. And basically they tell you in the first book, it's like, nobody's made it past floor 13. Somebody made it to floor 13, and they basically made the floor impossible and to eliminate him. So we're not sure how far it's going to go.
Because the people in charge rigged the game. You can only get so far, just by design.
Yeah.
And even if you cheat the game, you still lose, because they will make you lose.
Yeah, and now that we're past Faction Wars is the point where anybody who survives after this point is now given deals to get out. Like, you can work in the game, if you're really popular, and then you take a deal to, you'll work in the game for 600 cycles or something, and then you can go free in the universe. But they still keep them basically doing stuff. And
so is Carl taking a deal by this point, or is he still pressing?
It doesn't seem like anything's going to stop him for, like, he...
Go till you die?
Yeah, he has the resolve that he wants to push all the way, but we're not sure what's going to happen when we get to floor 13. If the game is still rigged against him, like, we're not sure if this is going to go to like book 18, or if it's going to, or if something's going to happen and it's really going to drastically change. I'm also not sure how far the concept can carry. I expect something significant is going to change within the next 2 books. I would guess that it's probably by the 12th floor. There's going to be some alternate route of escape that he'll find, or something. But it's just really good. All the characters are so well done, and especially the audiobooks. I can't remember his name right now. Jeff Hayes. He is phenomenal. He plays all the characters. He plays the female characters and everything. And he's just so good. He makes this book come to life. Like, you know each character individually. The way the book is written, there's not a lot of this character said and this character said and this character said. There's a lot of back and forth dialogue that isn't labeled who says what. And I'm sure in a page format, you probably have an idea. But you don't need it for the narration. No, definitely not. Because the voices are so distinct that even with a long break between books, you still know who every character is. And I think it's definitely the best way to experience this series. It's phenomenal. And
you said that the original author of these books self-published them, right?
Yeah, he started self-published online, and then he's continued to self-publish. I think it was just recently that he got picked up by a publisher. And so now the physical copies are kind of coming out. So lots of people are trying to get their hands on those. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty cool series. Definitely up my alley for sure. I'm into the TTRPG space, and I'm just shocked they get, like, how long are these books?
They're fairly lengthy.
Yeah, that's wild to me that they can make a concept that seems like it's kind of within a box just by its premise interesting for this long and lengthy formats.
Yeah, it's really surprising, like, that they're on book 7 of fairly long books, but he just has a way with the writing that keeps it so interesting, and all the characters, like there's constantly been characters added and lots of additions that keep things interesting, but the drama's always there. There's always stuff in the background. Like he never forgets anything. If anything is set up earlier, like by this point you're paying attention to every word, because any slight like thing left over, it will come back up, and it might not come up for 6 books. You have no idea, but the repercussions always come, and it's just really well done that way as well.
So what's the general tone of this book like?
It's semi-comedic. It takes itself seriously because it's very... Carl himself is very aware of the brutality of the whole system. So he's a very grounded character.
Straight man.
Yeah. But his thing from the first book is, you will not break me. So, but that's the trouble is, you know, going through this much brutality, is he still sane? Is he still hanging on? And even by the 7th book, you're starting to question, like if you go back to the first book, it's kind of like, well, is he even the same guy anymore? Is, you know,
yeah.
There's so many dramatic changes in it, but the system AI that runs the game is really comedic and tries, like, there's a lot of stupid things. Like Carl, one of the first things he kills, he squished it with his foot, and the AI builds this foot fetish for the rest of the thing and wants him in bare feet all the time. And stuff becomes sort of iconic to the viewers too. Like you think you've got viewers in space who are like, oh, that's funny, right? And then they kind of reward that action. So stuff starts to, it's really grounded for the characters who are there in these ridiculous scenarios sometimes, but equally brutal and comedic because it's entertaining for us, the audience, and also the AI and the aliens themselves.
So it's sort of a dark humor.
Yeah, definitely dark humor.
It's so brutal, you gotta laugh.
Yeah. Sometimes, yeah. It's not like in your face brutal, but for the characters themselves. Like, it's not overly described as brutal, but that's what the characters are experiencing. And you can tell by their mental state. It's not forced upon you that way, which would make it feel really dark. But it is described that the characters feel that dark brutality.
Okay. Well, I definitely like the sound of that. Don't know when I'll get to start it, but it sounds like something I should do. I would enjoy reading eventually. Sounds like something that'd be cool to adapt to at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I can see them trying and butchering a adaptation.
Yeah, they've been talking about doing an adaptation, but I think that the author's trying to push to get like an animation studio to do it instead, because they were talking about doing like live action. I don't know why live action is the thing right now, but
animation, in my experience, is generally a lot more consistent, because if you're working on an animation for multiple years, that's a lot more work than live action stuff, and those people make sure they're putting out a quality product, because live action, there's so many different stages in a live action production. It's like, okay, great, I can make my best script all I want, but the director might throw it in the trash and do their thing. Oh, but then the editor might take that and throw it in the trash too, and basically just ruin the whole thing. But animation is pretty much the same consistent people working on their product. They kind of know what it's going to be from start to finish. There's a lot more planning, and the crews are a bit smaller, and there's more of a cohesive vision, is my point.
Generally, it's it's got to be worked out first because the animation crews split between sections. The beginning and the end are being developed at the same time. You can't, after halfway through the thing is done, you can't just start changing things, be like, oh, we're going to change the plan, because pieces are being assembled by different people in different areas. It's got to follow the initial plan.
Yeah, in live action, all those pieces can be fundamentally changed at any point. So from concept to final product, a live action movie might be completely different. Animation's usually the closest from concept to execution, and that's usually pretty good because someone has to fund the movie based on a good concept to start with. I feel like a lot of movies don't live up to that because they're very different from where they started by the time it's released. So yeah, long story short, animation is a better way to go for something like this. Especially if you could do it as good as a TV show like Vox Machina or something. Get a long, like animated movie would be cool too. But if you're doing animation, do a show, because there's a lot of high quality animated adult shows out there right now.
Definitely. I could definitely see it being more of a show rather than a series of movies.
Yeah, or in the fantasy genre, like specifically, I guess I'm talking about Amazon Prime, because the two I think of are like Invincible and Legend of Vox Machina, which are both Prime Video ones. And I feel like something in that vein would be exceptional for this series. So we've been going on that for a while. We're not sticking to our 5 minutes very well, but trial and error. This is still the new stuff, at least. We're not making
usually have more to talk about new stuff, so
yeah, when it gets to the old stuff, I bet we'll be breezier. So next up for me is Mickey 17, Bong Joon-ho's new movie, which have you heard anything about this one?
Not at all.
Okay, so Mickey 17 is set on a space colony, a burgeoning space colony, and it's a bunch of these rejects from Earth who basically for one reason or another decide my life isn't very worth living on Earth. I'm kind of the bottom of the barrel in society here, so I'm leaving with basically an ousted, disgraced Donald Trump political figure who most of these people at the bottom of the barrel of society seem to adore this guy, and he decides, you know what, my political career on Earth failed, so I'm going to start my own space colony and take all these rejects with me. And Mickey signs up for this program. It's called the Expendables program, where they have this ethically ambiguous technology whereby you can download a person's brain, and basically through recycled trash that they use in like a molten replicator sort of thing, they can remanufacture a human body after death and basically just download the mind back into the body that's made of trash and feces and whatever they find around so he's basically got a functional body with his memory. And because he's an expendable, that's the whole thing. They send him out on the most dangerous and stupid missions, fully expecting him to die in the most horrible ways over and over and over.
So is he like backed up, or?
He has to back himself up every couple weeks. So they give him stuff like, okay, so we're going out in space. Like one of the ones this is a dark comedy, by the way. So that's why it was top of mind when I'm like, okay, the brutalities, you kind of have to laugh at it. So, for example, they send him out on a spacewalk early on, and they're like, okay, Mickey, so how's it going out there? How you feeling? Oh, well, I'm not feeling great. Yep, that's just the radiation. You're gonna feel some burning. Your skin's gonna start melting. Just describe these feelings as they're coming on, okay? Or as they get closer to the planet, they finally land on the planet, and he's the first one that goes out. They make him take off his environmental suit, like, take some deep breaths. We just want to see if there's any airborne pathogens we might have to worry about. And then he, gets killed by airborne pathogens. And then he's got to do a bunch of tests that kill him to find a vaccine for the airborne pathogens and whatnot. Basically, this is all expository stuff, like flashbacks in Act 1. We're up to Mickey 17. That's that the movie's Mickey 17. So the problem with Mickey 17 is that he dies, or so they think. They leave him for dead. Just like, okay, Mickey, sorry, can't do anything for you, but your flamethrower's still in good condition. We'll take that back. Great. But Mickey 17 doesn't die. But they replicated a new Mickey. So Mickey 17 and Mickey 18 come face to face, but they have to keep this under wraps because this basically cloning technology is already very ambiguous. The only reason it's even allowed is because it's a mission so far out of Earth space. Like, this technology's banned on Earth, but they're like, okay, you can use it in the outer reaches of space just because it's a very tough life out there and we can condone some expendables. But they absolutely refuse to have multiples. Later on, you find out why the original inventor of this technology was a very bad guy and created multiples of himself to commit crimes. So they're like, okay, but do we charge these all people as the same person, or is it like different charges for each clone, or like the moral ambiguity of it was just too much. So they're like, no, we ban this technology from Earth, and even in the outer reaches of space, if a multiple happens, we destroy all the clones and erase that mind off file forever. So he accidentally becomes a multiple, and he's like, well, shoot, if anyone finds out about this, I'm just erased forever. They're going to kill me and my clone and erase us.
But yeah, but he naturally doesn't want to kill his double, I would assume.
His double wants to kill him, though.
17 wants to kill 18?
18 wants to kill 17.
Oh, 18. So
17 is very docile, is the thing. Every time he comes back, different aspects of his personality come more to the fore. It's kind of like Doctor Who regeneration in a way. And Mickey 17 is this very docile human being. He's kind of a doormat. Mickey 18 is more of a take charge, all the more the tougher parts of his personality sort of coalesce, and he's just a lot more cold-blooded. He's just willing to kill Mickey 17, no questions asked. And Mickey 17 is like, this sucks. You stole my girlfriend. You want to kill me. I can't go for help or else they'll erase us. This just sucks. But also there's a problem because on this planet are a native life form who seem pretty hostile to the humans. So the Donald Trump allegory is trying to find out a way to make his colony work alongside them at first. And his wife basically just wants to turn them into soup. Ooh, exotic recipes for my sauce. And one of my favorite things about this movie is that the scientists in the top brass, they're just clinical bastards. They're just like, they don't care what they do to Mickey. They're like, they can kill Mickey in the most brutal ways, and they're just like, yep, take the notes. One of my favorite scenes is the one where at the start when they're reprinting him, they try to treat him with a level of respect. They're like, okay, he reprints out on the table and whatever. But then the more times it goes, it's like, oh, sometimes we forget to put the table there. His body just replicates and falls out onto the floor. Like, they don't care after a certain point.
Oh, man.
That's what these scientists are like. So basically the themes of this movie are where I start to have some issue with it, just because they're very on the nose. It's like, okay, colonizing is wrong, and Donald Trump is bad. It's like, okay, the thing is, I think the thing that bugs me about this portrayal of this politician character is how on the nose it is, and how many Trump parodies I've seen in the last 8 years. I'm like, okay, I've seen this all before and done better. And did you have to go so far as to make his cult-like followers all wear red hats? Could you be any more obvious what you're doing here? Yeah, it just take that for what you will. I'm like, okay, but it's very clear how I'm supposed to feel about this guy. I'm not supposed to like this guy. He's an irredeemable, arrogant, evil person who's manipulating all these people just so he can be king of his own colony in space. It's very obvious what's happening here. There's no nuance to it whatsoever. And it's very clear this is what I'm supposed to think of this situation. So
mixing politics with movies, but
it's
too direct.
It's very much this is what's happening at this time. I have trouble separating it and being like, okay, so this is a hypothetical space despot who was a failed politician on Earth. I'm like, okay. But it's so of the moment that it's like, okay, I'm seeing this done everywhere. So I don't know, maybe this is one of those ones that'll age better when I'm not seeing Trump parodies every 5 minutes.
Or it'll be worse because nobody will actually get the connections, maybe.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Maybe it'll be better when you don't get the specific connection. So I don't feel like, okay, here's another Trump commentary. But it's still pretty on the nose for my taste. Not that I disagree with the politics it's trying to promote, but I like sci-fi to have a bit more nuance to it. Like, okay, maybe he's doing something good here, even though he's very arrogant and trying to be king here. No, he's just irredeemable. It's very cut and dry. But
Get your politics out of my sci-fi.
Politics and sci-fi is fine. I just like it to be a bit more
sci-fi politics rather than real world politics.
Real world politics have always been in sci-fi. Like you go back to Star Trek, like 60 years ago, real world politics were in sci-fi. I always say, like, look at the original series. You had a black woman on the bridge in the middle of the civil rights movement. You had a Russian on the bridge in the middle of the Cold War. You had a Japanese man on the bridge 20 years after World War II when tensions are still running high. Like, there's always been politics in sci-fi. But it's just like, when I look at Star Trek, I'm like, that stuff is there, but I have to read into it. I'm not being told.
Yeah, you're not force-fed it.
I look at Star Trek and I'm like, okay, it's very progressive, but it's not telling me what to think about every single story it does. This is like, no, you're supposed to hate this guy, and that's it. He's not doing anything you can think about as like, okay, well, I can kind of see the main bad guy's point. Like, no, I don't even empathize or sympathize whatsoever. It's just like, why would anybody follow this guy? But the philosophy behind the movies, kind of interesting. The ethics of multiple personalities. One of my favorite parts of the movie is when Mickey talks. Everyone always asks Mickey, what's it like to die? And he never really has a clear answer to it. But his problem when Mickey 18 comes into the play is that he's like, well, as an expendable, I always knew that if I died, no matter how badly I died, I'd always come back. But now if Mickey's 17, he's like, well, if I die now, that's my replacement. I don't come back. So he's sort of having these existential crises, seeing his replacement in the flesh. And also the fact that if they get caught, his entire being will just be erased from all the hard drives and everything. So there are some interesting philosophical debates about cloning and the ethics of cloning and clone technology in here. Robert Pattinson's the best part by a mile. He plays 17 and 8, both 17 and 18, and the way they mesh together, it's like I rarely think, oh, this is the same actor playing two different parts. It's like they're in the same frame and it's just very fluid, and he's playing distinctly different characters, sometimes like talking to each other frequently or fighting, like whatever body doubles they used in certain scenes or the editing tricks. It's very seamless in there. Toni Collette's probably the second best performer. Excellent set design, phenomenal CGI. The alien creatures looked fantastic. The action was really cool. It's a good dark comedy, which those are right up my alley. Though the ending, I figure, does go on too long and starts losing steam. So besides its on-the-nose politics and some pacing issues, it's worth a watch.
Sounds interesting to me.
It's interesting, but I feel like it's either kind of your thing or it's not, and I don't know if there's enough here to recommend any rewatchability. I think you get it the first time, but it's worth a watch. So next up is another new one. The Witcher, Sirens of the Deep, which is the newest Netflix animated project, which I believe is set in continuity with their TV show. I believe. I think this is set in the middle of season 1, which this one will be interesting for you because you haven't seen this one, right? Mm. But you have read some of the original Witcher short stories. So you probably have heard the story this one's based on.
Probably.
Yeah. So as I describe it, you'll probably recall. So basically Geralt and Jaskier they come upon this fishing village, and the village is about to go to war with the local mermaid population that's underwater, and basically it's a resource war because the humans keep overfishing the oysters that the mermaids and their other people need to eat, and the mermaids are kind of encroaching on the human sovereignty, but the human prince and the mermaid princess, they're betrothed to be married, and so everyone's holding back on a war just out of respect for their heirs, basically. And then Geralt steps in the middle of this. And first off, what I will say is, having read a little bit more up on it, it's the typical case of Netflix Witcher botching the adaptation.
Uh-oh.
In terms of, if you're a Witcher fan who has read this book, I will say, right off the hop, don't bother, because you will hate it as an adaptation from what I have heard, having not read the original myself. It's another case of, it completely misses the point. It was about Geralt doing Geralt's more an emotional struggle, and they made the whole thing an action thing about the war that was just background detail.
I do vaguely remember this one, and I was like, the war? Was the war that important? I don't remember it being that important.
Allegedly, no. In the book, no. But in the movie, it's the point.
Oh, man.
What I will say, though, is the cast is the main two, anyway. Doug Cockle returns as the Witcher in this animation. He voiced Geralt in The Witcher 3, I believe. And a lot of the other ones were voices from the show. Joey Beatty is Jaskier in this one. So I'd say those were the two highlights, Doug Cockle and Joey Beatty's performances in there. I love the water animations, specifically the establishing shot ones. There's a great contrast in colors in there. Some of them nearly look photorealistic, the way the light glints off the water. That just looked really good. But I'm a little bit more mixed on the animation style in general. Something about it felt small to me. Like, when it focused on characters, there was good attention to detail. They look good, they move good, okay. But I felt like it was basically like, if it's not right in the foreground, we're not putting as much effort into it. The backgrounds, the other places never felt that fleshed out to me. It's like, I noticed there was a lot of close-ups and medium shots in this movie. Not a heck of a lot of long shots besides establishing shots. And I'm like, I think they're trying to cut down on showing backgrounds, which I guess that's an animation trick, but it made it feel more small scale than I think they intended.
It's not a trick if your audience notices it at that point.
Yeah. Action was appropriately gory, but the actions they were taking mid-action started feeling repetitive. I'm like, how many times do I need to see Geralt jump 10 feet in the air or or blast the thing with this, or like run up the tentacles of the Kraken. I'm like, okay, I've seen this like 30 times in the last 5 minutes. Got it. Barely felt dangerous to anyone, I think, was another problem. There was a lot of dangerous stuff happening around people, but I never felt like anyone was in great danger for most of it until the ending, when consequences start happening. But Geralt looks fast and badass, which, cool. There are a lot of themes in this one, some of which I'll run down here. So Geralt sort of has a crisis of conscience of, okay, I'm hired to kill these monsters, but I don't necessarily think the monsters are that bad, so I'm not going to do my job. But so he's like, okay, do I do what I'm meant to do or follow my conscience? That's one thing. There's also resource war things. Like I said, the humans fishing the oysters, the mer people needing the oysters to survive. And there's this one scene that I thought demonstrated that pretty well, with the humans have an entire ship full of oysters that they're basically just tossing in the trash because it's like the entire deck is full of oysters until they find the one with a pearl in it. And that's all they cared about. They just waste all this stuff, all this food for the mer people who are starving down below. There's also the politics of it, the forbidden love story, the Romeo and Juliet sort of thing, except this couple has no chemistry. Really, it's purely a sexual relationship. They don't even talk. They don't even know how to talk to each other until they get a translator halfway through the movie. And as soon as they talk, there's problems, which is the funniest part. There's also the running theme of humans being vain and liars, deceitful. Even with the heroes, like Geralt is seemingly bothered by the fact that Jaskier lied about his upbringing, and they're actually in Jaskier's hometown. And he's like, okay, but do you blame me for lying about this place? This place was crap to me, and I kind of wanted to forget it, that I was ever here, really. Let's see, what else? Geralt being more humble than other people as well. He doesn't revel in stories that Jaskier tells about him. He tries to stay more reserved and correct the exaggerations. Love, duty, and sacrifice. There's a lot of themes in here, is my point, and only some of them pay off. But what I will say about the writing is, on the bad side, there's a lot that doesn't make sense. Going back to On the Nose, the dialogue is very, oh, if you didn't get it, I'm going to tell you, especially later on. And it also has, the bad guy's plan makes no sense. It just, like, why would you do that? That kind of contradicts a lot of other things about your character. But for an hour and a half movie, positive, I did feel like the main characters were pretty well established. I know mostly who you are and what your main goal is here. Even for people who've never seen The Witcher show, I feel like it establishes Geralt and Jaskier pretty well just in this movie, through some flashbacks and exposition to say, this is who these guys are and what they do. So I think it's decent even if you haven't seen other Witcher content before.
Well, especially if I remember correctly, the original story, this is one of the more important parts of establishing Geralt as being different from most Witchers because of his morality towards things.
I'd say that gets hammered home for sure.
Yeah.
It's probably not as prominent as it was in the book, but it is in there. As for other problems I have, it's pretty predictable plot altogether. Poorly paced, even with an hour and a half runtime. Started okay, got worse as it went. And there was also this one Little Mermaid moment of weirdness where there's just like a random song in the middle of it that was where like the mermaid witch is giving the princess a potion to turn her human. I'm like, this is literally just Little Mermaid with a song and everything. Only Yaskier sings. Stop this. It makes no sense. There was no lead up for her singing. There's no reason for it as far as I can tell. They just wanted a Little Mermaid scene, I guess. So I think if you are a casual Witcher fan, it's mostly entertaining if you watch passively. If you're a Witcher book fan, don't bother. Just
I'm already hesitant because
way away from it.
Yeah. I'm either remembering wrong or Netflix has really built up on the front end of this story.
I believe so.
Because as far as I remember, the tensions in the relationship between the mermaid and the guy are already they're already kind of done at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't happen till halfway through.
That's why I'm like, oh, they don't get to communicate till halfway through. That doesn't sound right. That sounds like they've bloated the beginning a lot.
Yep. So if you watch this, I'm curious. Once again, me as a casual, I don't have anything to compare it to. It's just an okay animated movie. I've seen worse. I've seen better. It's all right if you don't think about it too hard. It entertained me. But if you're playing comparison games, probably pretty painful for people who know what the original was. But then that just seems to be Netflix Witcher in general, which I've never had extreme complaints about because I haven't played Witcher video games. I haven't read the books. Netflix Witcher is really the only basis I have for Witcher, for better or for worse. So I kind of just compare it against other Netflix Witcher stuff.
Yeah, honestly, all the episodes basically feel like somebody gave them a summary of what's going on. They're like, this is the brief, like, one paragraph summary of how this episode's gonna go. Okay, and then they just go from there.
I see.
I always find there's a lot of really cool details in the originals that definitely, like, they're just gone. Like, all the small details, I can't even remember one episode where they managed to capture some of the smaller fine details that really kind of made stuff.
I see.
But it's only like the episodes are vaguely, you're like, oh, I guess this is kind of this one, isn't it? Constantly. It's like, oh, it's a little painful.
And for the record, I do enjoy Netflix, which, like, I consider myself like a fan of The Witcher, even though I haven't, once again, read the books or the games. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, that's sacrilegious, because those are more in spirit of what The Witcher is. But I'm also the same one who champions the Kelvin timeline Star Trek trilogy, because it got me into Star Trek, and the Netflix Witcher got me into Witcher, and I will 100% explore the other stuff at some point because of it.
Oh, yeah.
So it did its job, and I will probably go back and look at it with a more critical eye after the fact, but I've enjoyed it for what it is for the most part, despite it being very flawed as a TV show. I've got nothing to compare it against.
Yeah. I just take it as an adaptation.
I mean, you're kind of the same. I mean, you played The Witcher 3 before, right? That was your first
Yes, yeah. And
introduction.
then I got into the books after that. And then it's just, you have to separate things with adaptions. Otherwise, nothing that's adapted is ever going to be as good as the source books. I don't think there's ever been a series that's been done correctly. Maybe the closest being Lord of the Rings, but even then,
people seem to like Harry Potter pretty good.
yeah, it's pretty close. If anything, I think that comes down to the original writing not being as good as most people remember.
Yeah.
That might be a hot take, but
It might be. I mean, I only read 5 of them and only seen the first 5 movies. So
yeah,
I never even finished Harry Potter. It was never my thing. That's my hot take. It's not bad. It's just, I'll finish it one day.
I read all of them. I was crazy about the books, and I loved the movies, but I think the movies are better than the books. They're
All right.
I think they improve upon the books.
Hot take. I like it.
Yeah.
I'll clip that out and
Uh-oh.
throw you under the hot seat. No, I don't. We'll see. So, solo leveling. And we're already an hour in, so we should probably...
All right. I don't
moving.
have super much to talk about this one. So I'm going to talk about season 1 because I haven't quite finished season 2 yet. Season 2 there's a couple more episodes to come out, I believe. And then it'll be done for a while. I believe there's only going to be 3 seasons, as far as I've heard. Solo leveling is essentially, it's a power fantasy anime. It's a power fantasy, and it's very similar to a lot of other story. Like, it's a very common trope, the isekai or, game world system. Same with Dungeon Crawler Carl. Essentially, the lit RPG style is all done like that. And I've read a lot of those, and I've watched a lot of those. What I found interesting and unique about this one is that instead of doing where most times it's like, oh, we're going to transport you to a new world, or the new system comes to Earth and changes Earth, and everybody's getting used to the adaptation. This one, he's already in the world.
Okay.
He's in the world. Everybody, there's hunters. They're professional hunters, and they go through these portals to close these dungeons. They don't really know why they exist. But the whole world is already fleshed out. Everybody knows about these dungeons. He just happens to be the worst. Everybody is ranked by their power. You're allowed to be a hunter if you have this sort of awakening, and they rank your power, and it's like, okay, if you're an E rank, you're basically allowed to go into maybe at most, like, they grade the power of the teams. They're like, okay, teams have to be 8 or more to do these, and you have to have a certain power level if you want to go into a C rated dungeon, because they measure the mana coming out of the portal.
Okay.
And so everybody's kind of got their place, and they do it for profit. But he's the lowest of the low. He's the lowest recorded ever for power.
All right.
But he kind of does a Captain America where
Drugs.
no, not drugs, but more he shows his spirit. He proves that he is the honorable one, and that in turn helps him to become the only person they know of. Well, he doesn't reveal this to anybody yet so far. But he becomes the only one who can increase his power. Nobody else has been able to increase their power. Sometimes they've had people who've had a second awakening, and that's it. They increase in power, but there is no gaining. He gets a game system where he can level, and that's why it's called solo leveling. He's the only one who can level, and he's the only one. He's basically doing it all by himself.
Okay.
And becoming stupidly powerful.
I like the sound of that.
But it was just very interesting how it kind of turned things a bit. Maybe it's more common than I think, but I have seen and read a lot of these stories that are like this. But I really thought it was interesting that they took a world that already existed. It's just normal in this world, which made it even more interesting because of the way he interacts with the world. And it's just really cool. And yeah, it's got that kind of a Captain America feel where the guy who deserves to get power gets it. But then it takes a turn where you're not sure if the power is going to corrupt him or not.
Okay. Does that happen early on, or is that more of a season 2 development?
It's kind of there from the beginning because he powers up very, very fast.
Okay.
Like, he is probably midway through the season, he's probably almost the most powerful character in the whole show. Even though he doesn't quite know everybody's power levels, he's probably already like one of the most powerful at that point. So with that much power, he can defeat anybody easily. Like it's nothing.
I see.
And people underestimate him and try to gang up on him and like take advantage of him because they're like, oh, he's the lowest rated ever. We can steal his shit. And then it's like he can kill you with the flick of a finger. And it's like, well, what's this gonna do to him that he's not just powerful, he's not just the most powerful. He will continue to grow to be so disgustingly powerful that like he will break the reality of the world because of how much power he's gaining so fast.
Wow.
So it's very interesting to see where that will go. It's like a Captain America whose power continues to grow. How much power will you be able to maintain before it corrupts you?
Scary.
So it's very interesting. It's very good. Season 2 is very good so far. I'm not going to go into it yet. I'll probably talk about it later on maybe the next one when I'm finished watching it. But
excellent.
It's season 2 is just as good as the first season, if not better. So far.
Always like to hear that. So next up for me is Escape from New York, which excellent. Yeah, the production design is one of the first things that stands out to me in this one because nothing felt like sets. All of it felt like a real and repurposed wasteland of New York City. So basically for the premise, if you don't know, is New York City has been turned into the mega prison of the United States. That is where they throw everybody. They just walled off New York and let the criminals reign like it's Australia a couple hundred years ago. So the main character, Snake Plissken, he was a former military guy who kind of went rogue, and now he's a criminal too, who's getting transported into New York to just live there and be a prisoner now. Problem is, the President of the United States, on the way to this big conference, which I guess there's Cold War parallels there, I think he's trying to end some big conflict, he gets shut down over New York with very important information and gets captured by some of the criminals there. And because Snake is this badass operative who is one of the best in the military, they sort of suicide squad him, where they're like, okay, we can cut a deal. We're going to put a bomb in your head and you go save the president, okay? He's like, but I don't want to. I don't care. I used to fight for the country, but I don't anymore. It's like, well, too bad. You're going to be a prisoner in there anyway, and you're the guy who can do it. So, all right, Snake, you go. And also, for the record, Snake Plissken is the inspiration for Solid Snake from Metal Gear Solid. Very blatantly, I think the creator's name is Hideo Kojima, right?
Yep.
He's, from what I've read, just blatantly admitted that Escape from New York was his inspiration for Metal Gear Solid. So
that's pretty cool.
At the very least, it's culturally significant for that. Not the least because it's a badass Kurt Russell movie directed by John Carpenter. This one, so like I was saying, getting back to the nitty-gritty feel of New York, one of the things I appreciated most about it was how big the city streets felt. It's like, okay, we're just going into the streets and it's this massive scope. We're doing long tracking shots through this, like through the wastelands. It didn't feel like, oh, we're trying to keep this set contained. It's like, oh man, we're on actual streets here and it's just post-apocalyptic New York, which for 40 years ago in a movie that doesn't feel like it's got a massive budget, it really stands out. And I also loved how there was no fat in the content or pacing of this movie. It's a really tight script, mostly told through visuals. Good dialogue where there is some well-established characters with really great little quirks that differentiate every single one of them. And I love the repeated jokes in the movie. Like everyone knows Snake by reputation, and every single person, the first time they meet him, Snake? I thought you were dead.
That's awesome.
Basically everybody. So the culture inside New York is basically, it reminds me a lot of Fallout or Mad Max. Just sort of the way the characters are here with their own distinct factions and letting chaos reign in the streets. And it's interesting because we never hear the outside. The entire movie is set basically at the start, at the edge of the prison complex when Snake's being admitted in, and the rest is set in New York City. So we never see what the outside world is like. We just know what the maximum security prison New York City looks like. The main themes of this movie, I'd wager, are the individual versus the collective. Because in this, there's very clear parallels to, well, personally, how I see the US government turning tyrannical into a police state, largely, which I feel like was pretty ahead of its time for a movie 40 years ago, where the military and the police reign supreme. Their word is rule of law, and it's justified through a lot of propaganda, which everyone's like, okay, well, of course. But Snake wasn't buying into that. He's an individual who went his own way, and he's being punished for it. And yeah, so although I do find it funny because New York probably did feel this bad to people in the 80s. New York was sort of known as a hellscape in the 70s and 80s. So I think they were playing on fears like that. Like, well, let's just take New York one step further. But the weird thing about Snake, in terms of the individualism versus the collective, is that because he was a former military guy, a lot of these rough and tough criminals kind of see him as the man. Or it's like, what? You're the man. And he's like, no, I'm not. I'm a rebel. So, but he's also too criminal to get along with the cops. He's too much of a criminal to get along with the cops, and too much of a, military hard-ass guy to get along with the criminals. So he's sort of, nobody likes him in this movie. He's just constantly got his back up and has enemies. I think the meatier themes of this movie get lost in the middle as it becomes more plot-driven. And I wouldn't say I emotionally invest in any of the characters at any point, but it's just more like, this is badass and really entertaining the entire time. The supporting cast is really well done too. Like I said, everyone's got their own quirks and mannerisms, and it's kind of like playing a Fallout game or something. It's just like you find the random weird characters in this world and their tribes. John Carpenter has a badass score for this movie. I thought the action was hard-hitting, never overdone, always cool. And what I liked about Snake as a protagonist is that he's badass, but he gets outnumbered a lot and injured. He spends most of the film on retreat. Really, like, he's the guy to get the president, but he's not. Like, and he is kind of going in guns blazing, but he's also, like, he is just one guy, and the movies never makes him feel like he's a one-man army. And I think the special effects work, the model work specifically, still holds up. Escape from New York's pretty darn good. Any questions?
No, sounds pretty interesting to me.
It's just a good, lean action movie. Like I said, not much fat on there. It's just, it gets in, tells its story, gets out, and it's just awesome. Great iconography, set design.
Now, you said there's a sequel to it as well?
Escape from LA, which I haven't seen, but I've heard more mixed things about. There are some people who say it's just a lazy retread of the first movie set in LA. Other people say that was an intentional parody of sequels that took the plot of the first movie, basically redid it with a new skin, and turned everything up to 11 with a higher budget. With a more comedic tone for measure. That's what I've heard about it. I haven't seen it to verify. But I imagine
you're going to try to watch that one?
Whenever it's available on some streaming platform, I watch for sure. So next up, this one we can mutually talk about. Hopefully not for too long. The Mist. So, yeah, I thought The Mist was really good. It's a great microcosm of humanity's decline in a crisis. Everyone starts off at, okay, well, this random mist goes into town and the entire thing's set at a supermarket where everyone's just going about their daily business. There's like a military base on the hill and everyone's like, oh, is the military doing something weird? What happened? And there's a couple military guys in the store who get picked on later because of that. But it's just sort of, hey, okay, there's this random mist that shows up and the first couple guys who try to leave get brutally murdered by something in the mist. So everyone knows, all right, we're stuck in the supermarket until the mist clears up. If the military comes, or maybe it was their fault, we don't know what's happening here. Are our families okay? Everyone wants to get out. Everyone's trying to dissuade each other. And then they start breaking up into tribalism and different groups, and there becomes this religious zealot who is everyone's worst enemy at the start. Man, shut up, lady.
She's done so well in that movie.
Your Old Testament God isn't punishing us. Shut your mouth. And then people start buying into her until she becomes a cult leader.
Yeah, this movie does an excellent job of making you hate her so much.
Yeah.
It's great for that.
Whittles everybody down until basically just the main characters are like, what is happening? Everyone was against her 2 days ago. Yeah, but that's one of my main criticisms with the movie, though, is I feel like everyone moved to cult-like worship a little too fast. Because the whole thing's just set over a couple days. I'm like, I liked seeing how everyone's mental state declined over time. And it was feeling believable up until she became a full-on cult leader after a couple days. I'm like, couple weeks, maybe. I can buy that this would happen in this microcosm eventually. But in the time frame, it felt a little too squished.
Yeah, I think that was a problem I had with the movie was the pacing. It's goes from really slow pace to really fast pace to really slow pace again. Like even when they go next door, that was slow pace somehow.
Right.
It's not. Yeah. It's supposed to be really dramatic, and you'd think that that's something like that would be faster paced. It's really slow paced, and I think they took too much time. You know, really, really slow at the beginning, really slow in some parts in the middle. And I think they could have condensed that down to give it more breathing room for, you know, that major conflict that comes about.
I agree. It's some of the pacing is a little weird that way, but I think it mostly worked. Like I did like when they go to the other store because it was, okay, it feels very dangerous to step even a couple feet outside our store, let alone next door. That was a very brave and deadly mission. We're trying to get some supplies here. And it's like, okay, that's really the furthest the movie goes out until the end is, wow, holy crap, you guys are going next door? Whoa, hold your horses.
Yeah, and I shouldn't complain too much about the pacing because I actually really do like the beginning and I really like that portion. I do really like the slow portions. Yeah. But it really forced them. It's almost like they like those portions too and then had to get the rest done because it's based on a book. It's based on Stephen King's I think it's just called The Mist.
I think so.
But I feel like they were trying to achieve, I think it was just the amount of time they had to put everything in. And I feel like those scenes were probably adapted really well because I liked the way those worked, but it feels like maybe the creators didn't really care as much about that central conflict And maybe it wasn't as much of a central conflict in the book, but the way the movie presented it was sort of as a central conflict that just got, here's the conflict, let's get through it as fast as possible.
I see.
It's almost like if this was done as a miniseries, they would have fleshed out more in between. They would definitely add more to.
Well, it's because our main characters were the ones dealing with the problem, and all the stuff happening with I don't even remember her. It's like Mrs. Darmody or I forget. What she's doing is more in the background. It's like, sorry, we're dealing with a problem, and whoa, when did this cult pop up behind us?
Yeah.
We're trying to solve the problem here. But that's one thing I enjoyed is it managed to keep tension throughout the movie because the characters just kept facing challenge after challenge. It was very well written in that regard of, okay, we got through that. Oh, what's next? Oh, crap. And that just, like, the threat just ballooned and our resources just dwindled. So every time there's a confrontation, it just gets worse. More body counts keep racking up. The monsters just keep getting bigger. The resources they have to fight them with keep getting smaller. And people are getting more crazy as time goes, more stir crazy. Personally, the mist, and it's got one of the all-time twist endings, which, not going to spoil that, but it's a great ending.
It's famous for a reason.
Does it leave you satisfied? Not necessarily, but it fits.
The ending is appropriate.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. It makes sense. Will it leave you? It's not satisfying though, but that's the point.
I love the. I feel like this is one of the only movies that I can think of offhand when somebody's like, "Oh, a mid-2000s movie." I'm like, "Yeah, it's got the mid-2000s feel."
But like a better version of it?
Yeah, it's like you would actually have nostalgia for the way this film was done.
When I think of mid-2000s movies that are like less good, I think of something ironically like Venom, which is a newer movie, but that feels like the movies people are talking about when they're like, "Oh, this feels like a mid-2000s movie." Like, yes, I could see Venom coming out in 2004 and even just to the fact this character existed and was more popular in 2004. Like, Venom is very the edgy 90s. Anyway. Yeah, The Mist, pretty darn good. So, Harrow the Ninth.
Yeah. So I talked about Gideon the Ninth was the first book in the series on this podcast before.
Yeah.
And so there's Harrow the Ninth and Nona the Ninth, which is the second and third books. To talk about these, I'm going to have to spoil the ending of the first one. So if you're interested in Gideon the Ninth, just skip this portion. So the ending of Gideon the Ninth has the two main characters merge. They had the necromancer and her cavalier. For the necromancer to become a proper necromancer, in the end, she had to have the cavalier merge with her. So that way, one body would have the fighting skills of the cavalier and the necromancer skills to basically make them what's called a lictor. So it's basically the necromancer king head guy has his lictors. He's got I don't know, probably 9 of them.
Yeah.
Because there's 9 houses. So that was what we were left with in Gideon the Ninth, is they merged, and they discovered that was the truth, was that they had to merge. Going into Harrow the Ninth, now Harrow's the main character. This one was a bit of a mess, I found, because they did this really strange thing where Harrow is not Harrow. She has amnesia, and we're not really sure why. And she's thrown deep into being a lictor for the king. And we were kind of left with a cliffhanger in the last one. What's really going on with them? We have no idea who she is, and she's got a block of things going on, and things are different. Her flashbacks to memories have a different cavalier. She has a different cavalier. His name is like Ortis or something. And Ortis was a character we were introduced to in the first book who died immediately. He took a taxi that was meant for Gideon, and then he blows up and he dies. He was supposed to be her cavalier, which is why Gideon becomes her cavalier. But we're thrown into this and things are so different. It's very complicated what's going on. But it just ends up being a mess of a puzzle for the first half. It does eventually come together. But the problem is that you're getting flashbacks that are flashing back to the first book, but things are different. And you're getting flash forwards. And then there's current time where she's just kind of starting, and it's hard to tell where is what. And you're also dealing with a character who potentially has two people mixed into them, so you're not sure who's who. And all of the characters are very confusing. There's a lot of crossed over personalities, and people go by multiple names, and it just made it so messy that I found it very hard to follow when we were in a flash forward, when there was a flash back, when especially having things changed. And there was a reason for it at the end, but there was a point where I was going through it and I'm like, all right, I got to Google if this gets better, or is there a point? Because it just seems really random what's going on. And they're going into the history of the Necromancer King, so there's his flashbacks. It's so all over the place that I was like, okay. It's very cool.
Sounds convoluted.
Yeah, it's just extremely complicated and made into a puzzle that I don't think that added anything to it. The mysteriousness of it didn't add anything to it for me. I feel like it would have been better told straight and just done, because it would make more sense. And what was going on with the lictors and everything was a good enough story, but it was made overcomplicated. But in the end, it turned out fine.
Okay.
And the ending was very ambiguous again. So going into Nona the Ninth, so I wasn't very impressed with Harrow the Ninth. It was okay.
Got the job done, cool, but it was...
Yeah, it could have been done better.
Good concept, middling execution.
The Necromancer King, his whole backstory is super cool. They go into the creation of the 9 houses and everything. That is extremely cool. The lore of this series is really, really, really interesting. Which they get more into when we go into Nona the Ninth, which sees Nona is a new character, but we're not sure how she connects to Harrow. We're pretty sure this is Harrow. We believe it's her body, but this girl is not Harrow. This is a fully new personality. She has no memories of that. And she acts as if she is a young child. And it's essentially her memories completely reset. And this is not really spoiling anything, because the connection between the two is completely split. There's a big time jump that goes on. So spoiling the beginning of this does not at all affect anything before. But now you're dealing with potentially 3 personalities in one, and you have another character who has changed from the necromancer is dead, but the cavalier takes over the necromancer's body. And it's complicated with that one. So all the characters are kind of complicated, but we're dealing with all different characters and a whole different everything. It's really complicated. And then it comes together at the end. But this one was told straightforward, and I really liked how this one played out. It finalized everything. The series is over with it, and it was really well done. The third one was really well done. The first one is very well done. The second one is it's fine. It gets you to the third one, and the third one was worth going through the second one.
I think it sounds like one of those things where the author had a really good idea for the next installment, but they're like, oh, I need a lot in the middle here, and it's too much to just have an exposition dump, but too...
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so. No, I think they had a good idea for the second one, but then went with this really complicated process of going through it. If it was sequential and wasn't trying to make a twist ending or try to solve the puzzle, I think it would have read straight just fine. And it would have been pretty good.
Presentation style.
Yeah, it was the mix-up presentation that really made it just a jumble mess. And I'm not the only one who found that. There was quite a lot when I searched halfway through. I'm like, does this get better? Or...
All right, I think we're over an hour and a half now, so we should probably save a couple of these for next one.
Okay.
So I'll just get into my quick picks for the stuff I thought was really good here. So my must-sees, these are the ones that I'm just going to say my 2 highest ratings, must-see and watch ASAP. So my must-sees were The Sound of Metal, Chef, Room, 7, Lost in Translation. Those are all my must-sees. You seen any of those?
Nope.
All right. So basically I'll try to do like a couple sentence rundown of what I liked. So what I liked about The Sound of Metal, it's about this metal drummer who's going deaf. And the entire movie is about him coming to terms with his deafness and learning to be a part of the deaf community. And it's told largely through perspective shots and amazing audio design.
Is this based on a true story?
I think it's loosely based on the story of a drummer who was losing his hearing, and he kind of pitched a story about it. Chef is about this super uptight restaurant chef who was known for being more provocative with his menu offerings at a certain time, and he's become pretty tame. So he sort of rediscovers his love of cooking when he gets a little impulsive, quits his job and buys a food truck and just makes really high quality food while bonding with his best friend and son on the road on a road trip across America. Room, that's the one where Brie Larson is kidnapped and forced to live in a room and was impregnated by her captor and has a son that she has to raise there, and then they get saved from the room, and it's sort of about them readjusting to normal life after spending most of a decade just in this one room where the captor brings them resources very sparsely. The kid's never known a life outside this room, and Brie Larson's having trouble readjusting, but it's told from the kid's point of view with like all the camera shots and everything. It's very perspective. Like there's no scenes he doesn't hear. So Room. 7, super intense. I thought I knew the twist at the end, but there was more to it. Like, it's one of those movies with a pretty famous twist, and I thought I knew it, but there's more to it. Great acting, filmmaking, story, and I feel like Matt Reeves took a lot of inspiration for his version of Gotham from this movie because it feels a lot like the Batman.
Oh, really?
In terms of cinematography choices. Lost in Translation. A lot of people will hate this because I feel like nothing really happens in it. It's mostly just Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson moping around Tokyo. But that's sort of the point, is these two kindred spirits who are just mostly dissatisfied with their lives, find solace in each other's company. It's not necessarily blatantly romantic. It's just two people who like each other's company, trying to make the nights less boring in Tokyo while they're going about their business during the day. The only one I've seen in the last 3 months, I'd say, is watch ASAP, is Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory, which I believe is in the 50s. And this one is based on a true story about effectively what happened was there was this World War I regiment in this French World War I regiment that was tasked by the arrogant leaders to take a position they were completely under-equipped and undermanned for. And then when that assault inevitably fails, multiple of the men who survived the assault are tried for cowardice and treason and going to be sent before a firing squad. And Kirk Douglas's character is the lawyer who has to defend them and say, no, these men were actually quite brave. They just retreated from an assault that we could never win. And basically it's about the military brass trying to save face and Kirk Douglas trying to stand up for his men. And I was nearly moved to tears with this one by sheer frustration of the story because it's so well handled in every regard. The dialogue, the cinematography, the action scenes, the acting, like everything about this movie is just perfect. It's one of my all-time favorite war movies after first, like, it's not action heavy except in the beginning. The second half's more of a legal drama, but it moved me severely, and I've arguably never been so frustrated after a movie experience before, in a good way. It was very moving. So those are my quick picks. And where can we find you?
Actually, I wanted to do something short at the end.
You want to do something short? Okay.
What if you had to pick one thing from your list that should be watched immediately? Just one. What is your top pick from your list?
Out of all these ones that I talked about today, well, you see, it's difficult because there are some things I think are of a higher objective quality, and there are other things I think are just really good time. I think just for the shortness, the sweetness, and just sheer awesomeness of it, I'm feeling strongly about Escape from New York. Like, it's like an hour and a half, and it's just awesome. So if I have to say watch something off my list, go for that. Like something like Invincible, I would say as well, but 8 episodes are more of a commitment if there's a time rush.
I'm going to say my number one would be Dungeon Crawler Carl. I think you'd be very into it. I think if you get the chance, definitely try that one.
Definitely will do. So, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram at jchurchtpm.
And you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at ThoughtPlane Media. Also, check out the Close-Up with Ryan and Joe Facebook page for latest updates on the show. If you listen to us in audio, check out our YouTube channel. And if you're on YouTube, find us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. Or also the Close-Up with Ryan and Close-Up Podcast Clips YouTube channel for clippings of the show. We hope to see you on the next Close-Up with Ryan and Joe, where probably another leisure list. We'll cover the stuff we didn't get to today and hopefully some new stuff as well. Till next time.
Take care.